Good afternoon. Welcome to Zambian Voices, an online conversation that highlights Zambian leaders who are working each day to improve the standard and well-being of their fellow citizens. I'm David Young, the Charge d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy here in Lusaka. Over the past months, it's been my pleasure to speak to these change makers to share information and insights on a wide range of themes, including education, entrepreneurship, health, democracy and human rights, and governance initiatives. One positive from our elections was that we recorded the highest voter turnout in the United States ever. It was the highest percentage in over a century. More than 65% of eligible voters cast their votes this year. The bottom line takeaway is that no matter who wins our election, it is critically important that the people came out to vote to make sure their voices are heard and reflected through their elected representatives. Zambian citizens will have a similar opportunity next August to make their voices heard when they go to the polls for national elections. But it's important to know that in order to participate in those elections, you have to be registered to vote. And that's why it's important that everyone plan to register by December 12th. If you don't register to vote now, you will not be able to vote next August. So that's an important thing for us to pass the word to everyone. As Zambia is doing a complete update of its voter rolls, even people who registered and voted in the past need to re-register in order to vote next year. Today, as we reflect on the importance of citizen participation in government, I'm excited to have on the program a leading representative of Zambian civil society that's working hard to ensure that young people participate fully in democratic processes. This guest that I have happens to be a graduate of U.S. government exchange programs and had the opportunity to see the civic engagement process in the United States up close and personal. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to our show guest Nyirenda, Executive Director for Operation Young Vote. Yes, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure, Your Excellency, and thank you so much for inviting me to this very important meeting.
Well, thank you, guest, but I must say, you've got to call me David. None of this excellency stuff.
Thank you, David. I will do so.
Okay, great. Now, Zambia's voter registration period is already underway. It started this week. Where should Zambian youth look to learn where and how to register? And why should youth care about voter registration?
Why is it important that young people take this exercise very seriously? It is important because at this stage, those who are 18 years or those that are 17 and will be turning 18 by the 9th of May next year must realize that they are being given an opportunity. Their right is being, they must take this as a right that belongs to them. And if this right that has come to them of them electing leadership, it's a very important aspect of life for one to elect leadership. Because if you elect a wrong leader, it means that you will suffer with the wrong policies for the rest of that period of that leader. But if you are going to participate and elect a leader that is responsive enough, that is going to attend and answer to the aspirations of the young people, but of the country as a whole, then you also benefit. So this is a huge responsibility that young people are given, and they should take it seriously because it is a right that must not be wasted, a right that comes with a responsibility. So it is important that we do not shun away from registering as voters. Let's go en masse and register as voters so that come that time, we'll be able to choose who becomes our councillor, who becomes our council secretary or council chairperson, who becomes our mayor, who becomes our member of parliament, and who becomes our president at the end of the day.
Well, thank you very much, guest. You know, it's interesting, in the US elections just last week on November 3rd, we had some of the highest youth participation ever. it really was a very dramatic increase in many ways in youth participation in voting. So I think that's another thing we have in common with our democracies is how important it is for people of all ages and certainly youth to be represented in government. And, you know, in a representative democracy like Zambia's, like America's, it's so important that people go to the polls and have their voice heard because our representatives are representing us. So you're exactly right. Now, I wonder, guests, what is your organization doing to encourage young people to vote? And which groups of young people are your focus? I know you were in our program of the International Visitor Leadership Program in the United States. And also, how did that shape your thoughts about youth civic engagement?
I'll tell you this, David, and everyone listening to me, that it is very difficult for a Zambian young person to acquire an NRC when they are beyond 16 years. Because there are so many questions that they are asked. Sometimes they are thought to be foreigners and so on and so forth. It becomes a tedious process and people end up giving up because they feel it is too much for them, even when they are indigenous Zambian. So it is important we tell the young people, we tell the parents that as soon as your child is 16, please take them for them to acquire NRCs. It's important. So we deal with young people at that level, but we also deal with young people beyond that 18 and encourage them to register as voters so that they are able to participate in electing leadership. But also when they are 21 and beyond, we also encourage them to contest for leadership, because it's one thing to always be kingmakers and to be told that you are leaders of tomorrow when tomorrow is today. So we encourage young people to offer themselves for leadership, because after all, some of them are better leaders than those who have been there for long. So we encourage young people to do that. But also in terms of right now, as Operation Young Vote, we the US Embassy in Zambia was kind enough to accept our proposal to engage young people so that they are able to, we encourage them to acquire their NRCs, but also register as voters and to cast their vote. So we'll be running this campaign or project for the next 7 months or so, where we are going to encourage young people in Lusaka and in Chilanga to ensure that as much as possible. In fact, David, I want to tell you that we want to beat America in terms of the young people that will turn up to vote this time around.
Competition can be healthy. We can have competition. And, you know, I accept your challenge for the Chipolo Polo to beat America in the World Cup. And I accept your challenge that you have more youth percentage participation in your August election. So I think I'll buy you a coffee or a Coke if you beat me in either one, and I'll expect you to do the same. But
no problem.
Okay. But in all seriousness, I think that, you know, for us and in the family of democracies, America and Zambia, we are both democracies, and we've been democracies for now more than 50 years together. We have 240, you have more than 50. And I think, you know, we're not children in the family of democracies. And that's a long time. Those are several generations. And I don't know about you, but I don't remember Thomas Jefferson and Betsy Ross or Abigail Adams. And you probably weren't around when the transition to multi-party democracy, you weren't voting at that point either. So what we need to do, I think, as citizens is to strive for the ideals of democracy. No election is perfect. No country is perfect. We see that in elections all around the world, but we have to strive for those democratic principles to improve our democracy, to get better, and to always look to improve, to strengthen the democratic rights of our citizens. For me, for my fellow people in government for the US, that's what we strive to do. And I know for you and others in Zambia, you strive for that as well.
Thank you.
Nice to chat. Thanks for joining us today, guests. So now I would like to introduce our next participant in our program. We're also very happy to have a leading advocate who's involved in the efforts to get women to participate in the political process and women to participate in voting. So I'm very happy to welcome Engwase Mwale, who's Executive Director for the Non-Governmental Gender Organizations Coordinating Council, NGOCC. Engwase, it's great to have you join us today. Thank you for being on our program.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It's a pleasure to join you on this program.
So Engwase, thanks for those comments. I know that your organization is implementing the Coordinated Elections Campaign Strategy to foster women's participation in politics ahead of next August general elections. How will this initiative encourage women's participation in politics? And why is it so important?
Thank you so very much, Your Excellency. Any program that is aimed at promoting the participation of women at all levels is one that gives us energy as NGOCC and the women's movement to be able to do what we are doing. Recognizing that our country has been registering low numbers of women in decision-making, especially in politics, this gave us an impetus to be able to look at how more coordinated we can be as a women's movement. And we have learned some lessons from previous elections where we have been implementing women in politics projects that have not given us good results. So therefore, in our designing the coordinated elections campaign strategy, we were looking at how we can galvanize broad-based support and participation of not just civil society organization, but we're also looking at how the political parties can be the openings and provide opportunities for more women to participate. We're also looking at how we can galvanize community support to be able to ensure that those women that are coming from the communities and are aspiring to get into politics can receive that needed community support. So we were looking at a program that was actually going to encompass a lot of other stakeholders. Apart from the communities, we are also looking to work with the traditional leaders, the church leaders, the media, and this is really broad-based to be able to ensure that we have the collective support and effort that will ultimately see the increase of women in participation. So of course, the long-term goal of this coordinated elections campaign strategy is to be able to see that women are not just coming up to vote, but they are also giving up themselves, for leadership. So in engaging political parties, we are looking into a program that we encourage adoption of more women, but also nominating more women to participate in the forthcoming elections in 2021, both at parliamentary level as well as local government level.
Engwase, we just had our presidential election last week on November 3rd. And one of the things we had this time was a very wide participation by women voters, including women of color, Black women, especially in the United States. They participated very actively and played a very important role in the US election. So I wonder, as you think about women participating here in Zambia's election, you have been at the forefront of promoting women's empowerment and equality here in Zambia. How has your experience that you had in the United States with the International Visitor Leadership Program, how did that influence the work that you do to promote women's empowerment?
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for reminding me of that exciting International Volunteer Leadership Program that I participated in. It was so great to be among African women leaders where there was a lot of experience sharing. I must say that the International Volunteer Leadership Program, by and large, personally, it brought a realization that in many ways, government's foreign policy, apart from just building understanding between nations, that particular experience brought to the fore that there is need, for various countries, especially the North and South, to harness an environment where women's leadership can be promoted to emerge, because our interacting with the different women in the United States actually brought in a kind of sense of belonging, because then you realize that women's marginalization and vulnerability are just barriers. But if women, team up and work together and network, these barriers can actually be removed. So what I did is that from the learning, when we came back, it was time that NGOCC was developing our new strategic plan. So we did include in that strategic plan, we were able to implement what we called the Women in Politics project. And we learned this, I think, from the women leaders in there, where we created a platform. We had different political parties in Zambia here, who sent their women leaders and also aspiring candidates to participate in what we were calling the Women Development Dialogues. So this is one of the greenfield introductions that are included in NGOCC programming. And the Women Development Dialogues became a very important solidarity building platform, because we had women from the Patriotic Front, from the UPND, from the FDD, from UNIP, and women were simply sharing their lived experiences. They were able to encourage one another. And one of the things that was coming out from the Women's Development Dialogues was the declaration by women that political violence in various political parties required that the women rise to the occasion. So I think it is, for me, it was one of those learnings that brought, into bear the need for good governance, but also ensuring that we exert pressure on the government in terms of advocacy as a women's movement for policy change that will be able to enhance legislation that will see more women coming into the political arena.
So before we go, Engwase, what parting words do you have for us and our viewers?
First and foremost, Your Excellency, I'll be failing in my duties if I don't congratulate the United States for electing a very first woman in the position of the Vice President of the United States, and for that matter, a woman of color. It actually goes to a great extent to show that the world is now becoming one, and then the world is now embracing women's leadership. And back to Zambia, I must say that Zambia's democratic dispensation can only bring meaning if all citizens, women, men, and the youth participate equally. And we have seen that happening in the United States. And I also want to ride on what Michelle Obama once said, that the measure of any society is how it treats its women. So women still remain largely underrepresented in our governance system back here in Zambia, and yet women are the majority, and they are also the majority on the voters' roll. So NGOCC wishes, therefore, to appeal to the many women out there that elections are an important human rights aspect, and that we all need to participate. It starts with the national registration in order to be allowed to register as a voter, and ultimately the decision lies in the ballot booth, so as to be able to influence the kind of leadership that will respond to women's aspirations and needs. It is possible to have more women in leadership because other countries have done it. The United States is already also showing the way that women can ascend to that high level. Zambia's current vice president, who is a product of the women's movement, is also another good example of what women's leadership that is modeled on the compassionate level of women's aspirations. So let us go out there in numbers and participate in the voters' registration. And as for us as a women's movement, we are going to urge a campaign that we are going to call a sisters campaign, where women will hold each other towards the successful general elections in next year. But also, most importantly, want to encourage the women out there to offer themselves for leadership, because it's indeed our democratic right. Thank you very much.
Well, Engwase, I want to thank you for joining us today. Your work with NGOCC plays a very important role in bringing the voices of women forward in the political process. And I think the efforts that you do as a leader are very important to make sure that women participate very dramatically. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you for joining us. And I want to say again to our viewing audience Thanks for joining us today. Just remember, voter registration has started. Please take your time to educate yourself of where to register, go out and register, and participate in the democratic process. And be an ambassador for registration. Share with your family, your friends, people back in your home province. Help them know how important it is to register to vote. So thank you.